purpose of this lesson is to learn how to make tables and graphs in Excel. Just a review of terms, just so we all remember that this over here is a table. It's the area where we have columns and rows, and we put data into those cells in order to collect the data that we've gathered in a lab, so that we've generated through our lab exploration. A graph over here is that visual representation of those numbers. It gives us the ability to look for trends in data, and it allows us to compare a little bit more easily because it gives us that visual reference. So here's what you're going to do. I need you to go ahead and open a Excel document. To do that, you're going to go to the Start button. Yours might be down here. I moved mine up here, but you go to your Start button, and if Excel doesn't show up in here, then what you're going to do is go to All Programs. You're going to scroll until you find the Microsoft Office 2013. You're going to click on that. Inside that folder, you will find Microsoft Excel. You'll click on the icon. The icon is green. Excuse me, for Excel. And it's going to bring you to a page that looks like this. You want to do a blank workbook, which is the first one. That's the default. Double click on that, and it will open up for you. Normally, you're going to be using the data that you generated from a lab. We haven't done a lab yet, so for right now, we're going to make up data. I want you to make up your own independent data, please. Do not just copy what's up here on the screen. I want to make sure that you're doing your own work on this. So, when we set up our data, the first thing that we need to do is have our column and row headings so we know what these things stand for. But it's really important that when we put numbers into our data table that there's no units that are in the cell with the number. I know that sounds weird. If we were doing it by hand, we absolutely would put our units right next to our number. We don't do that in Excel because it'll mess up our graph later on. So we're going to put our units in our titles. So for example, in this one, I'm going to pretend that it's days. So I'm going to have day 1, day 2, and day 3 on here. You'll notice that I did not start in the A1 square. Please don't start in A1. And then down here in A2, this is going to be the other side of what I'm collecting. So I'm going to pretend that I am doing a lab where I am looking at how many seeds germinated based on the salinity of the water. So I put some salt into my water and I sprayed it on my seeds, and I wanted to see how many seeds actually started to grow during that time. So on this side then, I'm going to put the concentration of my salt water that's on here. So I had some salt water that was a 1% solution. I had some salt water that was a 0.5% solution, and I had some water that was a 0.1% solution. So when I did this, I found, as I collected my data over my days, I found out that in my 0.1 solution, all of my seeds germinated. I am just making this up, so you're just going to make up some data to put in here. In my 0.5, on the first day I found I had 7 seeds that germinated, and that's all that ever, well, and then I had one more that finally popped out on the third day. And in the 1% solution, I had very few seeds germinate, because that's kind of a concentrated solution. It wasn't so good for my plants. Now, this doesn't give me a place to put in my titles for my columns and rows, because I always have to have titles on everything in science, because I need to know what it is that I'm actually showing in my data. Somebody should be able to read my data table and know exactly what I did in my experiment. So I need to add in some rows. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to click on the number 1. You can please click on your number 1. You'll see how my whole row up here, the whole row is highlighted. So it's going to insert the same row all the way across. And I'm going to come up here to the top bar to where it says Insert Cells. And I'm going to click on the down row. And I'm going to click on this first one that says insert cells. And you can see where there's a little icon here that shows how it's going to insert a whole bunch of cells there. So I click on that and now I've got an extra row. I'm going to do the same thing with A because I need to be able to label what these things are also. So I'm clicking on the down arrow with A. And I'm going to come back over to my insert. And I'm going to insert cells again. And so now I've got some space. So over here, on this side, these numbers, the 1, the 0.5, and the 0.1, they represent the percent of concentration of salt water. So I'm going to say this is the percent salt water concentration. So what I've done, and you'll notice that it takes up my space there. It's okay, I'll show you how to fix that in a second. But what I want you to notice here is that it gives me my units, right, because this is in percent, and it tells me what it is, and it's the saltwater concentration. So it's very descriptive. People will know exactly what those numbers represent. So I'm going to hit enter, and it's going to go away, and it's going to look like this. But that's not really how I want it to look. I want to be able to see the whole thing in there. So I am going to turn this text around, and I'm going to show you how to do that. To do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight the 3 cells. So you see I've got the one that I typed in, which goes next to the 1. I want to also have the text be in the cells that are next to the other 2 numbers in my table. So it's going to be in my whole table there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight those 3 cells, and then I'm going to come up here to the top, and I'm going to click on merge and center. And when I do that, it is going to merge and center my stuff. Now, still not going the right direction. So I have a couple more things that I need to do so that it'll be going the right direction. So I still have my cell highlighted over here. I'm going to come back up to alignment again. So here's the title that says alignment. It's right underneath my merge and center. I'm going to click on the little down arrow next to alignment. You'll see when I hover over it, it says alignment settings. That's what I'm looking for, is alignment. I'm going to click on that, and then I'm going to take down here where it says text orientation. That's going to tell me which way the text is facing. And so I am going to take my little arrow there, and I'm going to flip it up so that my text will be going the right way. It's not doing it yet because I haven't said OK. It won't do it till I say OK. But before I do that, so I've made it go the right way now, but what I also want to do is I want to wrap my text so that it all will fit in that one little box. And to do that, I come over here to where it says text control, and I click on wrap text. So I've moved my arrow over here on the right hand side of the box. I've moved my arrow up, and then I've come over here to the left side of my box, and I've clicked on text control. When you've done those 2 things, then say OK. Move your little arrow up, click on wrap text, and then say OK. And now I can see my cell. Now, the next thing I need is a title. Titles in science must be descriptive. If you can't just say data table. That is not a title. That is an indication of what the component is, but it doesn't actually tell me anything at all about the experiment. This should be like a sentence. It should not be 3 words. It should be 5 to 7 words at a bare minimum, because I should be able to read your title and I should know exactly what you did in your experiment. So what I would say here, because what I did in my experiment, remember, is I had these different concentrations of salt water. I sprayed it on my seeds, and I looked to see how many germinated or how many sprouted. So I would say number of seeds germinated in varying saltwater concentrations. So I have said what it is I measured, right? Because I measured the number of seeds that were germinated, and I said what was my independent variable, because this is what I changed. I changed the amount of salt water that each one of them got. So a good title should contain the dependent variable, and in this example it was my number of seeds that germinated, that's what I measured. The independent variable, I changed the saltwater concentration, and it should be descriptive of the experiment. Move that over just a little bit. Okay, so a good title should contain the dependent variable, the independent variable, and it should be descriptive of the experiment. I should read what you have, and I should know exactly what you did in your experiment. Now, this is good. This is the good thing. What we don't want to do, you're not going to call it data table. And by the same token, you're not going to call your graph graph. Okay, I'm not going to do that. You're not going to use the word or abbreviation for verses. Do not ever do that. When you say verses, you mean that something's in competition. That's what the word means. And so in here, if we said seeds versus saltwater concentration, we're saying that seeds are competing with saltwater. And that's not what the experiment is. It's not descriptive. It doesn't tell me actually what you did. So never, ever, ever use the word versus or the abbreviation versus. Okay? Never, ever, ever, ever. We don't do that. We want to have it more like a sentence, okay, and less like a phrase. Okay, it should not be 3 to 4 words. It should be long. So do not make it short. You cannot make a good title in three words. You just can't. It's not going to meet the criteria for what you need to do now in science. You know, when you were in elementary school, absolutely. Short titles were fine. But in high school, not fine. Okay, you need to have longer titles on this. And these are all things, the things that I'm telling you right now, these are all things that are in the grading rubrics. Now, before we go to make our graph from our data table, we need to put in some grid lines, because in a data table, we should always have grid lines. It separates out our data, it shows what's going on. Now, when I do my lab, I don't want to have 2 separate documents. I don't want to have a Word document and an Excel document. I just want to have everything in Word, and I want to have everything in the order that the lab report directions say they should be in. So I'm going to show you how to copy and paste this into Word. So you're going to open up a Word document, go back over to your Start button, click on Word. Now, I'm sure some of you have noticed this, that our Word is a little glitchy sometimes. And if you click on the blank document and you try to type in it, oh, see, it worked this time for me. But sometimes you go to click on it, and if your volume's on, it'll bing at you, it'll go beep, beep, beep at you, and then it won't let you type anything. If that happens, just go to the File on here, go to File, go to New, and just open up a new one. And usually the second, I've never had it where the second time around isn't okay. So we're going to make the screen a little bit smaller so I can have these 2 side by side. So I'm going to make my Excel window a little bit smaller. So I now have I can put my Excel next to my Word. And now I can just go back and forth. Instead of having to open one and close the other and all of that, I like to be able to look at them side by side. So this is just a simple copy paste now. So I'm going to highlight just the cells that I want. Missed out on my concentrations there. I want to highlight just the cells that I want. I can come up here to the copy button, or I can do my Control C. I go over into my Word document, and if I haven't started my lab report yet, I want to space down a little bit and give it some room, because the data table doesn't come first in the lab report, right? We tell what's going on in the lab, we tell what we did, and then we tell what the results were. So we never put it at the beginning. So if you haven't started a lab report yet, You'll always want to tap down a little bit if this is the first thing that you're doing. And then I'm going to paste it. And there it is. I'm going to hit enter in between because I'm going to put my graph in next, and I don't want my graph to be like squashed up next to my data table. So I'm going to make this one a little bit smaller. And I'm going to come back to my Excel document. I'm going to go make this one go away. There we go. All right, so now what we want to do is we want to make our graph. When we graph, we don't include the titles in our graph just yet. If I highlight this whole thing again and I try to graph it, it's going to mess it up on me. So what I'm only going to highlight is the things that I want to graph. And so I'm going to start here in B2, and I'm going to highlight down to E5. So I'm going to highlight B2 to E5. I'll do that again. You're going to put your cursor there, hold down your left mouse button, and you're going to drag over, and you're going to highlight just those things. You'll notice I don't have the percent saltwater over here. I don't have the title up there because I don't want to mess up my graph right now. So I've highlighted my stuff that I want to graph. And now I'm going to come up here to the top bar, and I'm going to go to Insert. So you're going to click on Insert. And it's going to give you a new toolbar. So this is where you have a choice in the kinds of charts that you can make. Right now I'm going to show you how to make a line graph. It's the same process for any of the graphs. You always want to use the kind of graph that will best represent the data. This particular data set is showing us change over time, and so a line graph is most appropriate for that. So I'm going to click on this, and you're allowed to choose anything that's in the left-hand column on here. If you wanted to use a 3D one, that's fine too. I don't really care. But just pick one of the ones that's on the left-hand side here. Sometimes on the bar graphs in particular, I don't want you to do anything stacked. We're going to do everything over here on the left-hand side. So I'm going to just choose the simple one. If you want to choose one of the more complicated ones, you can. And there's my graph. It's graphed it for me. It has a key down here that tells me what those lines stand for. But what it doesn't have on this is something that tells me what this 0 to 12 stands for. So I'm missing my axis labels. This, my bottom axis, is fine because it says days on there. Okay, so I know what that stands for. Now I want you to notice down here where my day 3, I forgot to put a space in between the two. I can come back up here and I can change it, and it'll change it down there. Okay, in the area that I highlighted. So I need to give myself some titles because I need to put a title here where it says chart title, but I have a box. That's a text box, so I can put my chart title in there, and I can use the same title that I used for my data table because it's the same stuff. So once you figure out one title, you do not have to figure out another title, but you do have to still put the title here. You can't just assume that they'll read it from the other one. So I'm going to put my title back on there. But I'm still missing this axis label. So I've got to figure out how I'm going to get that in there, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So you'll see that you have your graph is in a box around the sides. And you'll see how your cursor is like the crosshairs. You want to put the crosshairs right on the edge of the box and double click. And it's going to highlight it when it does that. Now you see I've got this heavier line around my box. Over here on the side now, I'm going to come up to where it says quick layout. So I'm going back up to this top bar, going all the way over to the left, excuse me, and I'm going to click on click layout. When I do that, I have this little box that comes up, and I've got all sorts of different layouts that I can use. And I want the layout that's going to give me all the text boxes I can possibly get, so that way I know what all my stuff is. And this is the one I want you to always use. If you end up with an extra text box, you can always delete it out. So when I hover over it, you'll see it changes. So whichever one I hover my cursor over, it's going to change it. And I can see that, like this one, I don't have a place to put a title or an axis label, so I don't want that. And this one actually gives me all the things that I need without having to delete out a box, but most of the time you're going to use this one. Okay. So when I click on this, I now have a little box here that says axis title. So now I can label what these numbers actually stand for. What was I actually measuring? So in this one, these are the different concentrations of water. These are the numbers of seeds. So as I look at this, I realize, wait a minute, this isn't graphing what I wanted to graph. Is it? So it is graphing what I wanted it to graph. It's graphing at the 1% solution, it's graphing my different days. If it were graphing what I wanted it to graph, then I would use the switch row column up here and it would switch what I was actually graphing, but it's doing just fine. So I want to come over here to my access title and I want to highlight the text that's in my access title. And what these numbers represent are the number of seeds germinated. Okay, my line stands for the saltwater concentration, and then down here at the bottom are my different days. So now I have a complete graph that has all the information that I needed to have. It has a title, it has an access label, it has this axis down here is labeled. Now if you just put 1, 2, 3, then you would have needed the access label to say days. But because I put day 1, day 2, day 3 in my boxes up here, I don't have to have a separate access label. It has a key. Now there's some of you who are going to say, oh, but I saw this one over here that has the data table at the bottom. And you could do it this way too, and then you would have both all in one, and then you only have to have one title. You would copy and paste that over and you'd be good to go. So there's a lot of different options with the layouts of the graph. If you're not as good with graphs though, just stick with this original one and have a separate graph and data table. So once again, we need to copy and paste. Now on the graph, you have to be really careful because you have to put those crosshairs back out here on the outside of the chart area when you right click and copy, or if you go up to the top and copy. If I click somewhere here in the middle, if I click on that and then I copy it, all I'm going to copy is that text box. So you want to make sure that you're copying the whole table by clicking out here. You can come back to, oops, you can come back to home. If I click on this, I can copy it, or I can right click on it, or I can Control C. And then I come over to my Word document, and then I paste. And there's my graph. So now I have my data table, and I have my graph. For today's assignment, this is all you have to do. So you're going to save this to your server documents, and then you're going to upload it into Canvas, showing me that you can make a graph and a data table in Excel now. We're going to be doing a couple of labs this week, one of which you're going to need to be able to do this. So if you have questions, the video, you can replay it on your own. There is also a direction sheet that goes through everything that I just did that you can download so that when you do your lab and you type up your lab report, you can come back to this if you need to.